Hello.
Hello.
So much silent, intense staring at screens.
I wasn't sure if I actually joined properly. I tried to join a different way. Can people hear me?
Yes.
No, we can't hear you.
Darn it.
And once again, it thinks I'm called SIG testing. Great.
I think we have quorum. Who's going to lead this crazy group of people?
Let me go find the thingy. I can walk us through the board. I'm looking at our agenda, and we have literally nothing on it.
Who's the note taker?
I can take notes.
Okay. So, yeah, we don't have any topics to talk about. I think the easiest way to do this would be to walk through what we have on the board, and if we have time left over, yes, Tim.
The action items from last time. Which Michelle's not here, but she's been rallying all of us to do the reviews for the charters.
Yes, that's one of the things on the board. The thing that's not on the board, I think, is we all voted, right? So Just Code of Conduct Committee, that's a thing. I actually haven't checked the steering mailing list, but
It's a thing, and it is an official list, and Michelle was going to reach out to people today, short of any of us hollering fire in email fast enough. It
okay.
seems like a good list.
Cool. Is this a thing we would like to announce at an upcoming community meeting?
I think it is a good idea.
Okay.
So I don't know if all these people will be notified and accepted by tomorrow, though. So maybe.
Yes.
That's why, yeah, I was about to say, I don't think tomorrow, but I think next Thursday we would like to hand over to this group for a little bit. Okay, with that, I'm going to try and share my screen to walk us through the board. Let's see if I can do this. Share that thing. Okay.
I feel like I haven't participated in this in weeks. I haven't. So, hi all. Sorry, I'm back.
Hi, Sarah. Welcome back. Since I anticipate we're going to spend the most time talking about charters, I kind of want to save that for last because I think we can speed through the rest of the things. So first on the list is what do we need to do for steering committee elections? So thankfully, Paris and George have documented everything they did, and they more or less told us what the next steps are. So we need to select election officers. I have talked to both of them personally. They're cool with it. They want to bring along a third person to shadow, so they're not critical points of failure for this. We need to define what the exact dates are. Quentin, you're cool. Your dates seemed good. And then, yeah, we had discussed criteria for members of standing, which I believe Tim and Quentin, you two had worked out a doc that involved or had an idea about using something DevStats related, right? Can we pull that together and get that on this issue?
Yeah, I can write up something hopefully soon. I can't take lead on it though from this point. I think somebody else is going to have to do that.
Quentin, can you take lead on this?
Sorry about the delay. I'm actually up for election, so I don't think I would be the right person to do that. But I think the election committee, which is pretty much formed, can do that. And then
right. So as you're currently a member of the steering committee, and as a current member of the steering committee, you and Tim, I think, already came to consensus on what our definition of a member of standing is. That was one of our, that was like one of our first responsibilities as a steering committee. So good thing we got to it just a few months before the next election. But I see no problem with you defining that, because we all as a committee agreed to it. We can find the link in the meeting.
Okay, I'm happy to do whatever needs to be done. I think most of it's done already. I guess I'm just pointing out that if I get to define who votes and I'm being voted for, that's a conflict of interests. I just want everyone to be aware of that.
I think this is just a matter of, let's summarize the discussion that we've already had and put it in a consumable form. And, and there'll be a chance for all of us to take a final look at it before this goes out to make sure it hangs together. So I don't think this is more like, hey, let's make sure that we don't leave this and make it up as we go along.
So I put this on the agenda for later in the meeting, but I'll just point out that there are a number of things like this where it'd be handy to be able to invite other people to this meeting so that we don't have to relay information to them some other way, like the election committee, if that were on the agenda in advance, if we could potentially invite them to the meeting to discuss that.
So I understand that, but I guarantee you the election committee would be like, well, this is why we, like RTFM, this is why we wrote the doc, and we outlined very clearly in the doc what the steering committee's responsibilities are. And so these are the first 3 steps, and we ought to document our decision in writing for what we think the criteria are for members of standing. And as far as I know, we did this. It's buried in our meeting notes. I just haven't gone and dug it out. So I would like either Quentin to take the 1, 2, 3 things in George's comment in this issue here, and just quote an answer in the issue.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
I'm happy to do that. That's fine.
Okay. And then, we can throw that through the steering committee mailing list if there's any objections, or we can cat her to make sure. But like, I feel relatively confident we've already made these decisions.
I think there's also a fairly low risk of gerrymandering, Quentin, or even accusations of gerrymandering.
Sure. Just wanted to make sure that people were aware of the conflict of interests.
Thank you for calling that out. Noted.
Sure. Okay, cool. Next item, document how working groups should be formed. I totally said I would take people and we would turn a thing into a PR, and I did not do that at all. Do we still have interest in getting this done in the next 2 weeks? So this is basically taking this document here, turning it into a pull request, having a meeting to iterate on it. I can absolutely, after this meeting, schedule something for us either later this week or early next week to ensure that we get to it.
I can take doing it into a PR if you want, Aaron.
And I have a PR that I've been meaning to update and get into that touches on some of this. I just,
So
that's on me.
My assumption was we weren't at the point where we could iterate on this in a PR yet. We needed to hash out like whether we were all in agreement or consensus, or if it's literally like, yes, this doc is awesome and we just want to turn this into a PR, great, and go for it. I thought we needed some more clarification.
Well, I guess the question is like, is it close enough that we can have a discussion on the PR, or do we like, I don't think we should have a lot of discussion and then just sort of rubber stamp a PR in. That doesn't feel right somehow.
Based on last meeting, all we need to do is look at the proposal, summarize it into a PR, and get it merged. So yeah, Brendan, why don't you go ahead and here, we can even assign this to Brendan. I forget, what's your GitHub thing? There we go. Is that
Brendan
right,
D. Burns. Actually, well, they're both me, actually, but Brendan D. Burns is the one that you should use.
Brendan D. Burns, that's the right one then. Cool. Yay.
Got my picture and everything.
All right. Codify steering committee liaisons for SIGs into SIG-YAML. Again, I said I would do this. I absolutely haven't. I promise I will get this done. It's going to involve poking people to fill gaps in the SIGs, and the PR will be out at latest early next week. Okay, that leaves us with the charter's meta issue. So if I walk through charters, let's see, ready to approve, I don't see anything in here. Who has a charter they want to bring up for discussion? Or do we want to talk about the meta problem where it seems like things were kind of slow?
I sent out notices on both PRs that I was on, and I think we got feedback on one of them, and I haven't gotten back to it. The other one is just radio silence. I think the common theme is radio silence.
So, Aaron, I'd be happy to talk about the one I know both of us reviewed. So I reviewed instrumentation today, and I guess the one thought I had and the one feedback I had was if the things that we think are associated with the SIG actually has participation by members in that SIG. So I feel like for instrumentation, I think you alluded to like if they own more add-ons, and I wasn't quite sure if in that case, when talking to Frederick, that they felt like people who had ever actually worked on those add-ons ever joined that SIG call. And so I guess what I was wondering is if in some cases we've associated ownership of a SIG where the people never joined.
So anecdotally, like I know somebody who is a member of the SIG who is in the owner's files for some of the add-ons related to FluentD. And so my impression is that it kind of implies that the SIG owns these add-ons somehow. It's kind of unclear to me who else would be the best SIG to own these add-ons in general. So
I guess I wonder if that's enough of a mapping, right? Like I think I'm probably listed in owners files that we roughly associate with SIG API machinery, but I do not attend that SIG on the regular. And so I guess.
Sure. Well, that's what prompted me to ask the question, because I saw it in the context of this SIG seems to be about defining like the best practices for a metrics collection pipeline. Sorry, yeah, a metrics like exposing things, right? And constructing a pipeline to do that. And so it's not like I'm trying to pin some sort of reference implementation of said pipeline on this SIG, but it seemed like there were a number of add-ons that they had that were like examples of how these things might be consumed. And so if this SIG doesn't own these add-ons related to the pipeline that this SIG is all about, talking about best practices for, like who should own the add-ons?
Yeah, so I think it's fine to say that. I guess all I was trying to call it is it felt like I'm curious if there are other people who have reviewed SIG charters have identified items that like the SIG lead didn't think they ever actually owned, or that the SIG lead felt like was never actually discussed in the context of their SIG. And maybe we could group those things. And so the add-ons one was the one that came to mind, but there could be others.
I think that's a legitimate issue. I think we should flag those things. I don't think it means that they should be owned by other SIGs, but we should figure out if the reason is because development's not happening or it doesn't need to be discussed in the meeting or something else.
Yeah, I just didn't want paper thin SIGs, right? So like sometimes we group them, but then the people aren't there.
Well, yeah, I mean, we do need to pay attention to that with SIGs as well. We need to figure out some health signals of SIGs, and certainly cluster ops and instrumentation, and probably some of the cloud provider SIGs are all sort of in the danger zone or already proposed that they get folded into other activities. And from my opinion about the instrumentation SIG specifically, is that the main purpose is to ensure that it's possible to get signals out of the system about the system itself and about applications running in the system, as opposed to blessing any particular implementation of the pipeline. And there are add-ons which were widely used for some time, like Heapster.
So Heapster is a thing they specifically call out that they own as something that's necessary and required to expose metrics or observability.
Or its successor metric server, right? So
yeah,
that one I think is clear. I think the question was like things that were outside of core. It didn't really. I didn't want a SIG to feel like it grew into a distribution.
Well, yeah, it's possible that some of these things we should evict as well, like Cube state metrics. Was sort of a proof of concept that we could convert API information into monitoring data.
So they are claiming ownership of that as in scope, for what it's worth. I was needling straight in on add-ons. I get Derek's broader point that we don't want to like voluntold groups, but in this case, I'm addressing the fact that there are literally no SIGs that own any add-ons whatsoever, or even the concept of add-ons that I can tell.
You mean the add-on mechanism?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
or the specific add-ons themselves, right?
Well, wasn't this sort of proposed by the PDK SDK SIG / working group?
No. So add-ons, I had previously said that Cluster Lifecycle owned that in concept, although there is currently no single add-on mechanism. The KubeUp cluster directory add-on mechanism is deprecated. COPS has its own add-on mechanism, and Cube ADM has like a kludgy hard-coded add-on thing the last time I checked.
Sure. It's just the situation is there's this directory in the tree called cluster add-ons that doesn't have like a default set of owners. Many of the individual add-ons themselves do have people as owners, but no SIGs as owners. You can make the argument that a lot of these are like, oh, these are all vendor implementations of an example thing. And
do you want me to just go through and assign them to SIGs? I could probably do that.
We could, but I guess I'm asking, this might be a situation where we're identifying a gap, and as we look to assign scope for all SIGs to make sure we're getting the appropriate amount of coverage, we're also finding gaps. And so is this something where we're like, this is ownerless, there is no SIG that owns any of these things and we must have a plan to kick it out? Or do we hold up all SIG charters until we've concretely assigned ownership of all these things.
Well, and there definitely are things that are known not to have clear owners, like the build system, where we need to decide at some point what SIG owns that, and clearly we're not going to kick it out. If there are things, and we should take an opportunity to potentially deprecate things or kick things out if they're not really relevant. I mean, everything in the cluster directory is kind of suspect at this point, and things in contrib are suspect as well. So I mean, there may be some of that. I would bet that a lot of these things, if they're not deprecated, it's clear what SIG should own them.
Yeah, so like on the add-ons section, literally the README markdown file for that directory says these are legacy, and so like I think it's fine if they're ownerless, in my opinion.
But who's going to be responsible for actually getting rid of it then?
The cloud provider effort is one of the things that is going to enable us to get rid of the whole cluster directory. I mean, people are working on deleting it. We need to remove it from the release bundle. We need to remove
There's a whole meta topic of like what's the sunsetting for a bunch of things that as we ratify all these charters, there's a bunch of things that gets orphaned or no longer has a home or isn't a subproject of a SIG. What is our process for giving them like a sunset period for like you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Like for example, tons of things that are an incubator that don't necessarily fall underneath this charter for a given SIG or a subproject for that SIG.
Yeah, we should come up with such a process. We should start just by cataloging them.
But I want to punt off on incubator for now. I think it's really important we get coverage of the KK tree. Like in this case, maybe it does make sense to say that SIG cluster lifecycle, as the owner of add-ons, the concept, owns this directory, but we assign the individual SIGs that make the most sense to these individual add-ons. And then y'all are all incentivized to get this out of the tree as fast as possible because you want it sunsetted.
Yeah. Yeah, like node problem detection, looking at that list, is owned by SIG node, I would assume.
Yeah, but like the repo is, but I would feel that like everything that's here is like core cube, which is what cube is to me. And then these add-on directories, when I look at them, they like assemble a distribution. And I don't think like we own necessarily saying which add-ons belong in the distribution or not. So like maybe I'm mistaken on that, but
no.
There are plenty of other ways that people could deploy Prometheus, for example.
You're correct, but if there were going to be like originally what this served as was sort of a reference configuration for how to turn these things up. So that should probably just live as an example in each individual repo or something.
Right. So
yeah, it looks more official than it really is there.
Yeah, I mean, or if people wanted to test these in end-to-end tests or something, there needed to be some way to instantiate them. So we figure out the new way of doing that.
Like, I get that we all recognize that it's deprecated and it should go away and it should not be here. I think my point is, like, there needs to be an owner and to actually drive that deprecation. And so to me, that sounds like a SIG should actually drive its deprecation. So
is SIG architecture not the right SIG to decide whether we need something, in which case a home should be found, or to get rid of it, in which case it needs to get rid of it?
Well, I think Aaron is talking about the actual logistics of removing it, which I don't see SIG architecture doing. SIG architecture might decide that it should go away, but I don't see that actually.
So we actually have some folks at Google who've been chipping away at this. I can try to ask them what the current state is and what SIGs are involved. Cluster lifecycle is one of them, but it's not the only one, I don't think.
Do we want some sort of like SIG janitors?
Well, I mean, ideally, this is kind of weird because...
Who's going to sign up to be part of SIG janitor? I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah.
It's like SIG garbage.
Well, I mean, there's plenty of SIGs, but I don't understand why people sign up as them. People sign up and it works for them.
Yeah, SIG signs up to be on the
steam. SIG should own their own trash. This is just kind of cross-cutting. So I'll take an action item to follow up on figuring this out.
I just like...
For my own awareness, Brian, isn't every one of these add-ons dependent on add-on manager? And if so, can we just say like the owner of the add-on manager should be responsible for moving these out?
Well, that would be cluster lifecycle.
Like
Okay.
the word,
Yeah, I'm literally looking in the owner's file, and I guess there's not like a lot there. So
the word add-on doesn't show up anywhere in our current list of subprojects as owned by SIGs. So I really think if Brian's really super of the opinion that add-ons are definitely cluster lifecycle, and we have a representative from SIG cluster lifecycle here, we should.
Hey, that's me.
Yeah.
So
Is that
four
a yes, or should we get that?
four add-on mechanisms have been implemented by various subprojects of SIG cluster lifecycle.
So yeah, so we actually have finished. We've wordsmithed our charter and we'll submit it this week. And we've defined core add-ons, and everything else falls underneath SIG apps. So there's a set of core add-ons, and I'm not intimately familiar of where this lands. I know that people have had fits and starts of multiple versions of add-on management, and I think we would have to take a look at it.
So like if I were to look at this directory, probably the DNS thing, would that be considered a core add-on?
Yeah, but that's already managed by different projects. So DNS is a core add-on, yes.
Right. Like I could see the lens.
what is the definition of a core add-on?
It's defined in our current charter. So we'll submit that, and we can needle it to death there. It's required for bootstrapping.
Okay.
I look at it as can't pass conformance without it. I still keep coming back to, it sounds like either SIG cluster lifecycle or SIG app should like own the default things, and then specific SIG should own the other things, and whoever is the default owner of these add-ons should drive deprecating them. And I hate this trend of like, I didn't write this garbage, why are you handing it to me to become the janitor? Because this isn't the only place we'll have to do this in this project, but I don't understand how else we drive this stuff out unless we actually hold people accountable for it.
Yeah, and I completely agree, Aaron. But I guess the part that made me uncomfortable is if we felt like we were volunteering a SIG that they needed to do something versus the SIG volunteering.
Yeah, in my case, I was legit just asking the SIG, like, hey, I think you might be missing add-ons here. And if they had a disagreement, my next plan was to start going face-to-face. So I think I want to kick us out of drilling down so deeply on this particular point, and just talk a little bit about how do we feel like so it seems like there's just been a general lack of responsiveness on these charters. It's going to kind of kill me if we come to the next steering committee election and like maybe like 6 or 7 SIGs have their charters defined.
Well, one thing that I found worked well for not charters, but other topics was going to the SIGs to explain what we're trying to do and what we're looking for, because there were a lot of misunderstandings. That's very expensive, the number of SIGs we have, but part of the point of distributing the SIGs amongst different steering committee members was to have that level of engagement. Now, for me, July was almost a total loss, so I haven't had time to do anything about this, but I'm planning to get back to it. I know I was pinged about SIG apps at least. So, you know,
I mean,
it might need in-person discussion. I just found helped a lot.
I mean, there's other levers we have, and we should explore those. I mean, we can say, you know, no KEPs approved, no, you know, no features merged, no like API reviews until you get this stuff nailed down.
No new repos.
No new repo. Well, I mean, yeah, no new repos is an easy one.
Well, also, I mean, if we're using SIG membership as a signal of eligibility for voting, we could simply say SIGs without charters, or, you know, membership in SIGs with charters.
We don't have information about what people belong to what SIGs, and many people are involved in multiple SIGs.
So I agree we have other levers we can use. I don't think we're really at the point where we want to use those, right? That sounds a little like too much too soon because, yeah, July has been kind of nutty and summer has been kind of nutty. But I think like huge thumbs up to Brandon for actually going through and going across all the charters and like updating all of them. I think like I'd love for us to kind of take consistent next steps on the rest of the charters. Maybe the appropriate thing to do here is, since I see there are 5 charters under the charters needing SC review. We could just kind of walk through them, see where they're at, and see if we can walk away with like, what are the next steps we should be taking? Because it sounds like it's, you need to like find a way to escalate and have an in-person dialogue.
Well,
I like this. Let's take one and just move the ball forwards, because otherwise we're kind of like talking in a circle.
I feel people could merge the SIG node charter right now. But
So, by
Brendan's
the
on
way,
vacation.
SIG-Auth did get merged. I don't know if you guys saw in the comments.
Let's go take a look at SIG-Auth.
I-
Yeah, I noticed you updated the charters meta issue. Hooray, it got merged.
So I guess it's ready to approve. I mean, it's ready for objection. Maybe we just say that.
So as an example of a good charter that we thought was good enough to move forward, it's got pretty clear in-scope and out-of-scope stuff. Okay, cool. Yeah, so Derek, you brought up SIG node. You think it's basically ready to go. Let's see.
Yes.
Who are the other 2 reviewers for this? How can I find this out?
I think
Derek,
it was
you-
Brendan and
There's the spreadsheet, has everybody marked.
Where did you post the spreadsheet? Too many things. Where did you post the spreadsheet, Tim? Sorry, I'm not seeing it.
I didn't post it. I think it's either in the backlog or I'd have to dig it up. But that was the canonical source for us saying who was reviewing what.
Sure. Okay. And just so we're taking a look at what we think is basically ready to go. Pretty clear code and binaries. Pretty clear out of scope stuff. Okay. SIG scalability, I know I can ping this real quick. Tim and I both pinged, and like Wojtek's out on paternity leave and Bob has been unavailable. So I'll go see if I can ping in person. Hey look, here's another charter that actually seems to have gotten merged. Service catalog. This looked like it was Brandon and Michelle.
yeah. So Michelle's not on the call right now, but she was the other reviewer on Node besides Brendan.
Okay.
yeah, I think that was mentioned in the email.
It does kind of jump out to me that they seem to have a lot more overrides in their roles. I thought our hope was to kind of have as few overrides as possible.
I think one thing that happened with service catalog is a lot of people who had not previously been involved in the Kubernetes community got involved in that effort. So Paul Mori was trying to help them understand how the Kubernetes community worked, but they started off doing things in somewhat different ways out in incubator land.
Okay. Multi-cluster, no response. So since I just can't seem to pull the spreadsheet up unless somebody else has dug up the link, I think really like our action item should be to go through and chase the people responsible for authoring these things down. Like if your name is on the spreadsheet for this particular charter, you should go show up at this SIG's meeting. And I think like proving that you attended the SIG meeting would be a good way for us to verify that. You can comment on the charter review, showed up at such and such meeting to discuss. Because it could be that the person who originally authored the charter is out, or you need to get input from other people. So Brian, you said you wanted to talk about SIG apps. No response since we've posted anything on the template.
Matt Farina has been regularly pinging about this, and mostly it's been locked on me probably, not steering committee in general. So we just need to get back with Matt, which I will try to do now that July is over.
Okay.
And the main concern there is that SIG-Auth has historically done a number of things that we would consider out of scope for the Kubernetes project as a whole.
Right.
Figure out whether to grandfather those things or sort of declare them out of scope. And if they want to discuss that stuff during their meeting, it's fine, but it doesn't have to be in the charter necessarily.
Yeah, so in this case, like, I haven't updated to the template, so the whole goals, non-goals thing doesn't really sit with us. Too much duplication of roles. In
any case, I think it makes sense to resolve the higher level questions first before they go updating the template. The scope is the real thing that needs to be resolved there.
Okay. SIG CLI. We ought to make sure that Phil takes care of this before I believe Phil is going on leave soon.
I believe Phil is gone.
Okay. So we ought to identify somebody else to take this on. I'm not sure who the second member assigned to this is.
Steering committee member. Yeah, and we also, I guess Sean authored it, so at least Phil's not the author. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll make a note of that.
So multi-cluster needs to update to the new charter. That's the wrong PR. SIG architecture. Last I remember, you had said something about wanting to kind of punt on this for now. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's where we need to figure out what SIG architecture is doing, identify the sub-projects and how it's going to be effective at performing its role. We've done some work on clarifying some of the major efforts and creating backlogs for those things. So I think we have a starting point for that, but we're really, since our SIG architecture in some sense is still getting off the ground, and we're figuring out how to be effective. It's not a clear cut of just like documenting what has been done historically in that SIG. So it's not really ready to move forward. We could potentially close the PR that exists and come back to it when we resolve those issues.
Okay. Yeah, I think I would suggest you do that, but maybe this is something SIG architecture should talk about at their meeting tomorrow.
Okay.
So
I wonder, sorry, just on the general topic of these charters not being ready, I wonder if it isn't worth just getting, in general across all the SIGs, get in there what is there, sooner rather than later, even if they have TBDs in them, because we can always, these things are living documents, they're going to change over time. I'm just wondering if we're trying to make them all perfect.
So I feel like we kind of have already had this discussion, and where we landed was that we want to at least get the scope right. Joe, I see you have your hand up.
I would worry that if somebody checks something in with an expansive scope and then they point to it saying like, look, it's in scope, and we're like, but we never really finalized that, then it's going to be very, very difficult for us to actually tweak that over time, right? Like once these things are checked in, they're seen as approved.
Sure, no, I understand that. In which case, provisionally just shrink the scope to a point where it's acceptable, and then, expand the scope later.
Kind of where we're at right now.
Should we have like a meta argument that says all these charters are quote unquote something like provisional for now, and will be reviewed and rationalized again in 6 months time period, some time window, so that way we have a clause by which to come back to re-review these things, because I do have the same fear that like we want to get these things in and somewhat there, but we want to have a forcing function by which we can continually review these at some time interval.
Well,
So
I think reviewing them is good, but like, are we going to do a better job in 6 months when that deadline happens, or are you just kicking the can down the road?
It depends who we have. I mean, to be honest, like we are the most overcommitted group of people to be on a steering committee I've ever seen. So if people had resources or time devoted towards doing this, I think it'd be possible. But we're already like SIG leads and have other leadership responsibilities and other things ongoing. It's very difficult for us to commit to doing some of this work.
So I had a chat with Michelle before she started pushing on all of us about this, because yeah, I think really like we are overcommitted. So we're trying to dwindle it down to like the smallest scope of work that still seems to provide value, which is getting a swag at scope correct. But then I think we do need to make it clear, like this is going to be an iterative process. We are not etching things in stone to be handed down from on high and used to hit people over the head, right? So to me, like having some of these things merged so with the same community meeting where we talk about the Code of Conduct Committee, I think it would be great to kind of hash some of this out and try and present that tone of, hey, we're really trying to go forward and really just focus on scope, the smallest bit of work that we can, and then kind of point to some examples of how it's been done well and emphasize that this is an iterative process. Because yeah, I've heard discussions a couple times now about how there's some SIGs that maybe need to be reformed or merged or whatever, right? And so like, we need to make sure that the door is open for that. As you say, Tim, rationalizing, right? Like we have to make clear that step one is document what we have, and then step two is kind of see what makes sense. If we need to like super document all this and mail it out and whatnot to get that tone across as well, we can do that. But my feeling is having a face in the discussion is at least one strong component for that. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think the SIGs who have started on this would be happy to get something merged at least, so they feel like progress has been made. I think if we take the position that, let's just get them updated to the templates and have some non-objectionable scope, even if it's not the full scope in place, that might be a good starting point. And for sure, all of the cloud provider SIGs, even if we change how those SIGs are organized in the future, I don't think that needs to block merger of these charters.
Okay. So that's more or less all the charters that this issue lists as needing review or in process. I think what I will take an action item to do is to, since I'm already going through and making sure I've got liaisons assigned for all of these different SIGs, as I'm doing that, I will go through and ping you to make sure you're going to go chase down your SIG if your SIG has a charter out and there has been no traction on it. And I think we should just kind of use the mailing list to checkpoint where we are next week before the community meeting. Because like I said, I think it's kind of important to have made some substantive progress. So with that, that's everything on the board that's not blocked. Documentation requirements are blocked on Jace coming back, I believe. So we'll get there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and take a look at what else we have on the agenda, because Brian, you said you had added some stuff.
I just added some meeting logistical issues. Previously, we had talked about setting up some office hours so people could bring issues to the steering committee that they wanted to discuss that we weren't responding to, or there was no clear way of contacting us through other forums, since we have like private email lists and Slack channels and meetings and things like that.
So Saris was looking to bring people onto the Meet the Contributors to have a steering committee edition of that, which could be office hours. Did that not happen while I was out?
That did happen.
It did happen.
Been able to attend that.
Okay.
Yeah, so one happened, and she is looking to schedule another one in, I want to say September.
Okay.
I think Joe and Brian, you've both been invited to that one.
Okay. And the other just thought I had when discussing these issues is that it would be handy to be able to invite some non-steering committee members to this meeting when relevant for, election stuff or code of conduct stuff or charter stuff or whatever. Like it was mentioned, we're all very bottleneck people. There are people who want to help, but it's super hard to get engaged with the steering committee at the moment because most of our interactions are private.
That's part of why we make these things public, but yes, after the fact.
It's public after the fact, yeah.
Right. No, I know. Actually, it was quite funny. Jace brought this up today. He's like, I'm trying to help you all with the projects and such on GitHub. And maybe we could consider having someone who is the designated note taker member, community member at large who sits and doesn't vote but helps on the call with us so that we can. He said he has been watching them and ended up shaking his fist and grumping at he's like, but I did the thing and it's here kind of things.
And contributor experience folks.
Same things.
Helping, yeah. So I think by making everything kind of private and exclusive, we're slowing things down.
Yeah.
And putting more burden on ourselves than actually necessary, as well as limiting the pool of the next generation of steering committee members who would be able to hit the ground running if they were actually participating prior to throwing their hat into the ring.
This looking more like the CNCF Technical Oversight Committee members and then the contributors to the Technical Oversight Committee.
Yeah, and that hasn't worked out super well yet, but
there's hope.
There's at least opportunity for other people to participate, listen in on the calls, participate in email discussions, contribute to project diligence, things like that. It still takes bandwidth and effort to try to onboard these people, but it's probably on the long run less effort than trying to do everything ourselves, or at least more effective than doing everything ourselves. Especially since we have, after this election, we only have a year left for the bootstrap people. Right. We'll want to make sure that whatever set of people we have directly on the committee and also helping the committee are not starting cold.
So Jace has been incredibly helpful, but my devil's advocate position is if we brought in Jace to help run this meeting so he could yell at us in person instead of at the screen, we'd be de facto just appointing yet another Googler to come in here. And I want to hear from the non-Google steering committee members.
It doesn't have to be Jace, and they don't have to run the meeting. Just people who can have context and potentially continue to be relevant about stuff that's going on.
In general, I think it's a great thing to do, right? I think, and we've done this in the past. I feel like with Paris and George.
Yeah, George is a good example.
I don't know necessarily how I feel about a standing person. I think I think that might not be perfect, but I think that if we know in the agenda, or even just say hey, if you can tell us that you saw this thing in the agenda and you have expertise and you can help here, I think that's a good thing to have come to this meeting. I don't think it has to be exclusive.
Yeah, if we wanted Christoph to come to resolve any final issues with the GitHub administration or something like that, then we could invite Christoph to come.
Or, I think we talked about who owns build. I kind of would vote for SIG release to own build, but we probably should have the SIG release leads here to have that conversation, there's stuff like that.
Yeah, for what it's worth, the CNCF TOC has similar problems. They're all overworked people. And they have Chris, who's not actually on the TOC, but who does a lot of this stuff and makes sure the right people are there at the right time and that the agendas are set up and a lot of the backroom work happens. And that seems to be reasonably efficient. Brian, you're also there. That seems to be relatively effective.
Yeah.
Even though he doesn't actually have a vote or anything like that, he makes a lot of the stuff happen.
Yeah, this is true. And he's, I don't know if he's entirely full-time just on that. I think he has a broader Linux Foundation role, but having a person dedicated to doing that stuff does help a lot. And it also helps that there's an appointed chair, Alexis, who's responsible for making sure that there's an agenda And I guess we had talked about having a rotating position for someone to do that, but we haven't been that good at clarifying who that person is. But
I would
yeah,
say as long as like we all agree that we're fine to delegate responsibility, I don't care where the individual is. And, you know, it's hard to run a government without staff, and, you know, senators need staff, and I think the steering committee could use help too.
The steering committee can still approve things and oversee things, and we can, you know, make decisions, but yeah, without more legs on the ground, not that much is going to get done. I think it's been demonstrated over the past year.
How does Helpdev feel about this?
I think the analogy is very on point with regards to government. I don't have a firm position. I generally think Jace does a good job. I'm okay with that. I do think that there needs to be some criteria for, you know, bringing people in and taking people out. So there's some rotation, right?
Well, I would say when and where relevant. Like if working groups are on the agenda and Jace is working on that, Jace can come to discuss that. Or like the code of conduct committee. I mean, Michelle was driving that, but once we have an actual code of conduct committee, if there's code of conduct related stuff that needs to get discussed, it would be good if some representative of that committee could show up at this meeting.
Sure, seems reasonable.
I guess the only question I have, and it's no knock on Jace or anything, but for the issues that Jace is picking up, were they advertised as other things that other people in the community could pick up as well?
I mean, only so much as, so in one case, and issues about like working group, I would say, so the short answer is no, we didn't have a broad call to beg people to help on things. A lot of the issues were publicly known, and I think people were waiting for us to do something. The code of conduct thing actually started as a CNCF thing rather than as a Kubernetes thing. So that has sort of shifted. He got sucked into it from that side.
Yeah, I guess my only thought is like if we do have people go and put together some seed information or draft up some docs, whoever initially writes that draft could have like elevated influence, because it's hard to change a draft after it's out necessarily, or it's a harder battle. But as long as like we put forward the idea that, hey, we're looking to get some assistance in this particular area, there are volunteers, and it just seems.
I guess I would say in general, we have often phrased what we're working on to the community as, hey, we're all overworked. We're perpetually apologizing for not meeting our deadlines and saying what we've done. And we've advocated that like the best use of our time is to bring us a well-formed, fully formed proposal. Like if anything, I think what Christoph did with the GitHub management sub-project was a fantastic example of that, because it was a pretty clear definition of in scope, out of scope, and concise asks. And so you could argue that authoring documents about process that fall under the purview of the steering committee, but the steering committee will never get to because the steering committee is doing 10 other things, is a great help to us, and anybody is free to elicit those proposals.
That's a great example, and we should call that out as a good example, I think, and encourage more of that.
Yeah, all I'm asking is like if we're going to have people draft things, it might help to say, hey, as a group, we're looking to get something drafted. We have at least one volunteer. Are there any others? Just so that it appears to be not another passive influencer member on the committee.
Yeah, no, I think if we agree to do this, we should make a broader call for participation.
Yep, I agree with that as well, which is why I raised the devil's advocate point.
And just up to now, we haven't had an official way for people to get involved.
Okay, that sounds like 3 awesome things to talk about at the community meeting next week. That also leaves us with 5 minutes left. Do we want 5 minutes of our lives back?
I believe there is no greater gift than the gift of time.
It lets me go to the bathroom and not be late to the next meeting.
Fair point.
I'm just saying.
On YouTube for the world.
Yeah.
I know. I'll put that out there. I can post that on Twitter. I'm happy.
Overheard. Joe Beda wants to pee.
Right. What was that? Don't say things you don't think your mom wants to hear.
All right.
I'm relatively willing to bet that that Joe's mom has heard about this before.
It's probably true.
All right.
On that note.
Cool. Yeah, let's call it then. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
See you in 2
Thanks.
weeks.